On today's episode, I'm going to be interviewing youth. Hi, how are you?
Very good. Thanks, Vic.
You're the first person who's had a single word name in the entire podcasting history of my podcast, so you're a first there. My traditional first question is, what do you do?
I describe myself primarily as an artist, but I'm multidisciplinary, so I'll be painting, drawing, etching, collage, but I'm also a musician, composer, writer, poet, and all things creative, really.
Cool. It's great. Now,
and a producer. I'll make a living out of being a producer and a musician predominantly.
Yeah.
But the art's catching up, so that's good.
Yeah, great. That's good. And obviously, the point about this podcast is that I'm really fascinated by people that are creative people and their story, because I think it's a good thing for people who are starting off, like young musicians and stuff like that, to hear what happened to people, because I think it gives them ideas. So I'm assuming, and I might be wrong here, I'm assuming that music was your first love. Am I right?
Music? No, art was actually.
Art.
I was set to go to art school, but I joined a band instead.
Right. Okay. So what you obviously had some sort of art, musical leanings before that. So what was that then? Were you just...
Well, I was a big fan of music. Music's always been an avenue to teleport myself out of any given situation into a different reality dimension or something.
Right.
Ever since, being scared by Doctor Who theme when Doctor Who came on when I was a kid in the 60s, hiding behind the sofa. And then I was born in 1960, so by the time I was about 8 or 9, 10, I started buying records and playing along to the records with a tennis racket in front of the mirror for hours and hours. Sergeant Pepper's, actually, I remember my father bringing that back home when I was about 7 and being fairly obsessed with that. And then from about the age of 12, 13, I was in boarding school for about 3 years. And that became a real... We had a converted coal cellar we could use as a music room, which we put mattresses on the walls and we could just play rock music or whatever. And that was a complete lifesaver, really. And also, just playing the piano in the music school just took me somewhere else. I learned guitar then. That writing songs put me in a different headspace. Writing songs I found good to express myself in ways that maybe nobody else was interested in listening. But if I put it in a song, I could get it out. So that really helped. And I think, then I left school quite early at 16. I was going to go to art school, but then punk rock happened, music just took over. And that became my primary focus. But I never stopped painting or drawing. I found myself, when I had a great art teacher at school, and his philosophy was you could bring records into the art class. So I'd have a double art class on a Wednesday or Thursday. He'd bring an album in and he'd put it on, or he'd just play the radio. So I started to associate drawing with listening to music. And vice versa. When I make music, I tend to draw when I'm in the studio. When I'm producing artists, I'll be drawing as well. And when I'm painting on my own, I'm always listening to music. And so those two create a sort of battery, positive, negative feedback loop for me, which constantly inspires me. And if I find the drawing too wearing, I can focus in on the music and go somewhere else, put my brain into neutral, and then resume and focus back into the painting or the drawing a couple of hours later or a couple of minutes later, and it's refreshed.
Yeah.
I think I might be a bit on the spectrum, because sometimes I like 2 or 3 sources of sound. I had a blind aunt in Nottingham when I was a kid who worked on the Nottingham local paper for 40 years, and she was like 90% blind and 90% deaf. Whenever I go around to her apartment in Nottingham, she'd have the telly on really loud, radio on really loud, and she'd be making thick, gloopy black coffee, Turkish coffee, and chain smoking Jatane. And I think I picked up some of her genes, because I kind of like to have sometimes the radio on.
Yeah.
I might have some ambient music playing, and then I'll have the Radio 4 on the phone, and then I'll be drawing. And so I kind of like 2 sources of music. Or sometimes might be making music on the laptop, like here,
Yeah.
but I have the terrestrial radio on really quietly in the background, playing sort of 70s power ballad hits. And again, I find it's kind of renewing, really. Sometimes it gets a bit like OCD mad or something, but other times I tend not to do it when other people are here, but when I'm on my own, I can just put my mind in neutral by focusing on one or the other.
Yeah.
And you create a little ecosystem that you can lay upon. My house in London as well is very bohemian, and it's covered in books and art and musical instruments. When I'm writing there, it's the same thing for my gaze. My gaze can just land on something and just take my mind off what I'm thinking about. And then when I come back to what I'm thinking about, I get a more objective focus on it.
Yeah.
And it renews it. I don't burn out in that way. Just being able to put my focus somewhere else for a moment enables me to sort of renew.
That's really interesting.
But yeah. And then when I'm producing artists, the thing is, this is a great dynamic, because when I'm in the studio producing a record, making a record, like, it's layers upon layers of details and tracks of different instruments, and all finely tuned and arranged, and and I have a team of engineers, assistants, the musicians, the technology, and it's a big epic endeavor making a record like that. And it's a lot of details, and it's a lot of process. So you spend a lot of time waiting for something to be plugged in or tuned up, or someone going to have a cup of tea, I don't know. But if I'm drawing while that process is going on a pad in the studio, it allows me to be a lot more patient than if I'm waiting. And I'm being creative, and I'm not relying on anybody else or anything except for a pen and a bit of paper. It's really low tech. So I love that. It's a total antithesis and antidote to the complexity of making a record and all the people and elements that go into that. It's just me and a piece of paper.
Yeah.
And so that creates a good dynamic bounce. It stops me getting frustrated, keeps me patient, and it keeps my creative momentum flow going. I know a lot of writers, artists who constantly got a notebook and they're putting things in for the similar reason.
Yeah.
And also when you look back, you get other ideas from them. So it's not that unusual, but having the dynamic where I'm going between music and art and writing and art, that's quite unusual, I think.
Yeah.
But
Well,
it works well for me.
there's something really fascinating about this, because I do a lot of NLP stuff, you know, the neuro linguistic programming, because there's
Oh yeah, I like NLP.
yeah. So there's obviously the hypnosis section of this. There are obviously a lot of techniques where you overload the senses in order to induce hypnosis. So you'll have, you know, the hypnotic techniques of somebody talking in one ear and somebody talking in another. Somebody might be counting, and somebody will be, you know.
Absolutely, I use those techniques a lot, and I
Yeah.
was talking about one yesterday, where when I was producing Crowded House, the bass player had what we call red light fever,
Okay.
which means every time the red light of the record goes in, he kind of trips up.
Yeah.
It's kind of like stage fright, but in a studio.
Yeah.
And the band said, I said, oh, we're going to do his bass now. He said, oh, we'll see you in a couple of days. We're going to the beach. I said, no, it's going to take a couple of hours. And we're not with Nick. Sure enough, it took forever. And every time we dropped in, he just couldn't help but make a mistake. And I thought I've got to do something a bit out of the box here. So I've been reading an NLP book.
Yeah.
Frogs into Princesses.
Oh yeah.
Frogs into Princes, an early one.
Yeah. Bandler.
That
Yeah.
I found in New Zealand somehow or somewhere. But I was reading it in New Zealand, and I started applying a lot of the techniques with the band that I was working with, which was fantastic. It was absolutely real enlightening experience.
Oh yeah.
And I realized, and so what I did with Nick, the bass player, was I'd have the assistant stand behind him while he was playing and read to him some poetry quietly, like whispered in his ear while he was playing. And that was enough to distract his conscious mind to the poetry, which allowed his subconscious just to do the thing.
Yeah.
We get the whole thing done in an hour, 2 hours.
Yeah.
That's really effective.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of things about NLP I really liked. How just, you know, the basic one of how you use language and communicate with language, and understanding its hypnotic potential and how powerful it is.
Yeah.
I ended up actually meeting Bandler.
Oh, you did?
I think it was
Cool.
Bandler, the one who. Yeah, I think the one who'd been the Hell's Angel before. There's two, Bandler and what was the other guy?
Grindler.
Grindler. One of them had been in Hell's. I think it was Bandler.
No, it was Bandler.
I met him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had this amazing session with him, Paul McKenna, the hypnotist.
Yeah.
Who was a friend of his and obviously used a lot of NLP and his meditation, smoking techniques and stuff.
Yeah.
This guy, Dan Morell, who came up with the term carbon neutral and was a big environmentalist, but he was a visionary free thinker, still is. And what we would do, we'd spend an evening and we'd take loads of drugs, we'd take ecstasy and mushrooms and hash and brainstorm. And I thought it was incredible that these cats, I'm not sure if you're allowed to publish this actually.
Don't worry,
I'm sure they're pretty cool. Paul's very cool. But I was just amazed that these cats would actually, you know, work with hallucinogens in that way, in a creative way to brainstorm ideas. Of course, now people are like Philip Cargom. You know, his new job is a consultant on psilocybin mushrooms for therapy, and
absolutely. I'll tell you a little story.
It's incredible.
I'll tell you a little story about Bandler. His sort of creation myth about himself, if you like. He was as a young guy, he was seriously into martial arts, and apparently, he was.
Philip Cargom.
No. Richard Bandler.
Oh, Bandler, right? Okay.
Yeah. So this is Bandler's thing, right? So he was seriously into martial arts, and then he was diagnosed with a tumor, which absolutely, you know, he said, I was so angry that I was, you know, so fit that I could be that ill. And he said, I basically went AWOL. And this is the great quote, because obviously because he tells stories, right? When you're with him, right? And he said, and I woke up in New Mexico. Now, that was a euphemism, I'm sure. Like, I woke up in New Mexico. He said, I'd had a bike. No, I had a car when I started, and I ended up with a motorbike. Don't know where it came from. And he sort of talks about the fact that he drank so much tequila that it killed his tumor. But I think actually the reference is actually going to New Mexico and waking up. So probably peyote or something like that.
Well,
everybody was going down there
he's
on
very
the
rock.
Castaneda Trail. So, you know.
Yeah. Well, I love Castaneda. Even though that was considered a bit of a construct, and that he didn't really exist. But his last book was interesting. He got really into UFOs, and he had a theory that the humans were the equivalent of a chicken coop for aliens who were farming us for our consciousness.
Yeah, well,
I thought he went a little bit too far. It was almost like getting into the phrase, but I love some of his early works, and it's like that book. Was it A Diary of a Guru, or that was a big book in the 60s of a guru in India. Okay, but that wasn't absolutely true either. It's interesting with NLP. There was a thing where they were some Senate meeting. Somebody was accusing the government of using NLP as part of their propaganda and marketing campaign. And I thought, that's an astute observation. But of course, NLP has been used for years for corporate training anyway, hasn't it? But it also bleeds into the new. It started off with a more new age audience, I think, and then became a bit more corporatized. But now, with the advent of fake news, you realise there's a lot of NLP in that, because it's the way you can spin anything with NLP if you want.
You can.
You know, that's how clever it is. And it's just that I always think of that example in the first book I read, where he goes, imagine a blue elephant. And of course, you can't help but imagine a blue elephant. That's how instantly powerful it is, isn't it?
Absolutely.
But of course, making music, producing music, collaging sounds into music, like what I did with the orb, which is all kind of made out of samples of other people's music. That's a kind of little bit NLP as well, because you're collaging or other expressions, emotions, moments of time into a single frozen time loop itself. You do that anyway with a record. You're collating and collaging moments into a 5-minute, 4-minute pop song or something, or dance record, and all those moments have manner and add to it, I think, and it becomes an American quilt, just a big, like an American quilt of associations. Every sound you put in, it has a different association for different people. And when you put them all together into a new sound, that creates new associations out of the old. But it's those associations that actually draw you in, whether it's an ironic one or a sincere one. Those are the things that actually pull you into, that make you listen to it, depending on how you've grown up. You know, it's very Jungian in terms of our taste. I'm reading Camille Paglia's Sexual Persona masterpiece book at the moment. She's talking about the Jungian Freudian idea of family relationships, where, you know, our early family life really defines our taste, and ancestral family life, because it's passed down the line through the mother's milk of previous generations, and that imbues our own sensibilities of taste and our sexual preferences even. And it makes a lot of sense to me. But it's the same with music. Everybody, an easy example is, you think of a piano on a record, say like Lady Madonna by the Beatles or something. everybody has a reference of a piano when they grow up, and it could be the Beatles, it could be their auntie playing in a pub, it could be a classical piece of Bach or something that their uncle liked or whatever. It could be anything. It could be some singer-songwriter. But that will, for whatever that is when you're a kid, that will then inform every time you hear a piano again, that will be informed by that first experience of a piano. That may determine whether you like the piano or not.
Oh,
it doesn't, because you've been exposed to ragtime blues, doesn't mean to say you're going to enjoy it when you grow up.
No, exactly.
So subjective taste and preference, isn't it? And it's so subtle, the things that influence that. And that's why I find that fascinating. I find that fascinating about everybody, regardless of how creative or in tune they are. Everybody has a particular taste and preference, and that's endlessly fascinating to me of how they've arrived at that. And of course, with musicians who have chosen music as a path, they have a particular connection to music that's made them make it their path. And that's always fascinating to me, what that path and journey has been for them. And it's always, it always blows me away that everyone has a unique journey, even though we grow up in the same way. It's like the nature of it is so diverse and subtle. It's like I look out of my window here in Spain and I get the same view every day down the valley. But every day it's different. And it's the same view, but every day it's different. And the same with people. Everyone's the same, essentially. We'll go through the same thing and the same process, but we do it in a very unique, individual way. And there's an existential kind of dichotomy paradox to that. But I love that. I love that we're all unique, and yet we share so many things.
Exactly. Exactly. So let's go back to, you were saying instead of going to art college, you joined a band.
Yeah.
So what happened?
And because I didn't go to art college, I began to self-educate.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of success early on with all the bands I was in. By the time I was 18, 19.
What was the first band?
The first band I was in was called Rage. Then I was in the Stilettos, and then I was in Killing Joke. Oh no, then I was in 4B2 and then Killing Joke. But Killing Joke was the first really serious one.
Yeah.
But I had a hit with 4B2, and I was already making records before that. But by the age of 20, 21, I'd already recorded 3 hit albums, half a dozen independent chart singles, a couple of chart singles. That success came quick, but I was committed, and everybody in Killing Joke was really committed. It was a full-time thing. Then I had a bit of an LSD meltdown, left Killing Joke in a roundabout way, and started another band called Brilliant, which became very influential as a sort of arts lab for me, with the different members in it and branching into different music. And that really led me on to becoming a full-time producer. And when Brilliant imploded around 86, after about 4 or 5 years, I started working as a producer for Big Life Management. And one of the first things they got me to do was Yaz, The Only Way Is Up. And I co-produced that and wrote and produced her album. It was hugely successful. The single was #1 for over 16 weeks or something. And then from that point on, I got busy. The phone didn't stop ringing, and I was just back to back, mainly doing pop dance. But then I started getting some breaks doing mainstream rock bands like Crowded House, James, and having a lot of success with that. That kind of led to me producing The Verve and having a huge success with Bittersweet Symphony. But for a good 10, 15 years, from the mid-80s onwards, I also started dabbling with record companies and experimental dance music and I still have five imprint labels, and I still do many things in that way as a kind of as a curator of a record company, really, and an owner and co-manager of the labels. And I still produce a lot of bands, but I still find I make time for my own work. So Killing Joke, or a lot of side projects or collaborations with different artists. I just did one with Allen Ginsberg posthumously for the Allen Ginsberg Institute, soundtracking a 35-minute recording of one of his poems, Iron Horse. That was really amazing.
Yeah.
And I did a big epic ambient soundscape to that. And but working with lots of people all the time, and very diverse cross-genre. You know, I work very hard working in lots of different genres, which is unusual. Most producers stay in one lane, you know, rock or pop or something.
Yeah.
But possibly because I've gone in so many different genres, I've had a lot more longevity and a lot of producers. I remember a manager I had about 15 years ago saying to me, "Well, you know what, you've been." She just started working for this Big Life who I was working with, and she goes on. She hadn't really been managing long, and she said, "Well, you know, most producers have, you know, between 3 and 5 years, maybe 10 years run, and then it's over." And she said, "You've had a good 15 years, so don't expect a lot of work coming in." And I was like, "Uh-oh." I said, "I think we should have a chat with Jazz and Tim, the main partners of the label, and explain what I do, because I don't really fit into anybody else's normal box."
Yeah.
And I'm certainly not planning on retiring now.
Yeah.
Of course, my success just got bigger and bigger. So, I mean, I do have broken the mold of what producers generally do. But like I say, I do break a lot of rules and go cross-genre and multidiscipline.
Well, that's what I'm interested in, because there's lots of things you've said, you know, really sort of resonate, because I sort of teach songwriting to kids, and I use things like cut up. So you're talking about the sort of montage.
I love that.
Yeah,
I love the whole bonus thing. Yeah.
Once the kids have got their head around what's going on, it's incredible. But I think
the great.
I was interested in
the great thing about. Go on.
I was interested in how this is going to be difficult to frame this, but you're saying about you have so many different influences, and you're talking about how you can have different radios on, or music from over here and something else going on over there, and you could be sitting drawing and all that, and it seems that you haven't. It seems to me that you've got more than one source of inspiration and sort of flow, and I would say that is unusual. That's unusual in people, and that probably would explain.
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. Why?
I'm very much. Yeah. I mean, I'm very much like, it's all about being inspired, being a writer and a producer, actually, because you got to inspire the artists you're working with every day.
Yeah.
And the way you get inspired is it doesn't just land randomly on you. You have to go out and get it, and you get it through reading great books, listening to great music, watching great films, and other people's great art, and absorbing that with passion, so that it makes you want to make it, or something like it. And so, I spend a lot of time doing that, and I've retained, my if you've had a lot of success, you've been doing one thing for a long time, it's very easy to get blasé and burnt out by it. So I've had to learn through many times of failing that I have to remain inspired regardless of failure or success. And so it's been good for me, because that's made me kind of not seek the approval of or rest on the energy of the success or failure, and carry on regardlessly. You know, that's a gift in itself, that sort of resilience and determination.
Yeah.
And I have that. I will relentlessly pursue something until I feel I've got where I want it to be. But the weird thing about writing is that there is a very magical process to it. It's one of those things that some of the most successful and best songs I've written, I have written in 15 minutes.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
and you know, but you can spend 2 years writing a song,
Yeah.
more,
Yeah. This is
and it won't make it any better.
well, this is the thing that I've, you know, the magical component of art, you know, because this is one of these things that people think that's a euphemism, but it's not. You know, it's magical, and there's that component where, well, you know, the moment you just get a song and it's there already, it's arrived,
Yeah,
and you just end up just
yeah.
writing it down.
But you need the discipline to write it down or record it, because
Yeah.
while you're doing it, I'm going to quote your Camille Paglia quote now. The bard may be the last person to realize what the muse is actually saying to them. You know, you may not get it as the bard. It may come through and you may not recognize it or get it.
Yeah.
And you'll dismiss it and it will be gone.
Yeah.
That's magic as well.
Yes.
And so I've learned to not try and judge it while it's happening. Let it happen.
Yeah.
Let go of all the intellect and just let it happen. Give it as good a shove as I can, and then come back to it and try and be objective about it when I come back to it. And often the ones you find or think or dismiss as not very good at the time, those are the ones that come out really good. So yeah, I know from experience you can't tell, but you do have to honor the creative muse and spirit by following it through, so you can get it to a point where you can be discerning and have an objective critical validity to it.
Yeah.
And even then you may not know. I mean, sometimes things I thought were massive hits ended up B-sides, and other things that I thought were B-sides were massive hits. So, you know, no one really knows. It is a real mystery why the public connects to one thing or not. There's no rhyme or reason to it. Something about, you know, 3 chords and the truth generally work, but that's not always. There are no rules, and all rules can be broken if there are. You know, some of the most complete fantasy, invented, banal lyrics an artist I've been co-writing with, I've come up with, have been the ones that made it a big hit, and people think are really meaningful, but to the artist and the writer, they're just a series of meaningless things. But again, it's very hard to. It's all down to vibes, which are sort of infinitesimal, small little things that make something good or bad. And again, it's kind of, you know, informed by your family relationship and what you grew up with and your own taste. And that won't always translate. I mean, it's impossible to tell. But one thing is, if it feels like it's meaningful for you while you're doing it, that will often translate. But it doesn't always work like that. Sometimes the most meaningless things translate better. Yes. Which is why a lot of pop music is banal and meaningless, but popular, I suppose. But it's a weird one. And there's a whole mystery school, you know, involved in what that is. And everyone I know, some of the greatest writers I've worked with, they're as mystified by it as anyone else. No one really understands it. The best way of describing it is archetypally in mythology, like the muse or you know, tapping into something, because it certainly doesn't feel like some of the best things. Okay, you can start off with a way you're feeling. Oh, I feel bad. My girlfriend left me last night. I'm going to write a blues song about that. Of course, that will probably come out as a complete cliche that people will instantly switch off from. But you might start there. You might develop it into something else, and what other people get out of it is completely different from your intention. I mean, that's what I love about Dylan. Dylan never explains his songs because he knows that whatever it meant to him, no one's going to really understand that except for him anyway. But there'll be an osmosis where they'll understand their own thing from it. It will enable that that process to occur somehow by osmosis. I don't know. That's real magic as well.
See, I think even you're talking about the muses. I mean, that's always been something that I've thought is a good way of explaining this thing that arrives, that you just have to allow through you, and to some extent you have to sort of honor the fact that you're just part of the process, but you're not, it's not from you, it's just coming through you.
Absolutely, I agree with that. I think you have to, in the same way, hollow yourself out as a flute so that the muse can come through you, but also you have to be inspired. So you have to be passionate about something, whatever it is, and you have to find something inspiring in some. As a producer, I have to find something I like in the music the artist is presenting to me. And you can always do that, even if 90% of it you don't like. But I train up assistants and producers over the years as well. Often when there comes a point where they go, what's the matter? You don't seem very engaged or connected to this. And they go, well, I just don't like this music. I don't like this song. I said, look, it's not about what you like, because that's just your ego being, judgmental. It's about finding something. Well, it is about what you like, because you have to find something in that piece of music you do like. It could just be the kick drum, I mean, but whatever it is, you have to find it, and then you have to amplify that, and keep going until you love it, and you'll do that if you're inspired. And the way you get inspired is by listening to other people's music and other people's work. And I would say, and copying it, because, it presents another paradox, like artists and their egos, their cathedral-sized, fragile egos, will say, I don't want to copy anything. I want to be original. But of course, the paradox of that is originality. Actually, the word came into use in around the 16th century to describe art that had a specific point of origin. So Turner was original to the Romantic school, and it meant the opposite to what people think it means today. It meant there was a specific source. And when you look at some of the most original artists like the Beatles or the Stones, they're heavily sourcing their inspirations. I've sat down with Paul McCartney and gone, what are the inspirations in this Beatles song? And he'd go, okay, well, the vocals, those harmonies are heavily brothers. The beats, Buddy Holly. The middle eight is Gene Vincent. And the chorus is Chuck Berry. And we just put it together the way we hear it. But we're trying really hard to be authentic to those original sources. As the Stones were trying really hard. There's a great film with Chuck Berry.
Yes.
That was produced by Keith Richards about 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And Keith made this film about Chuck and put a band together, and they did a gig with Keith in the band, all behind Chuck, and it was all a homage to Chuck, who, is Mr. Rock and Roll. And it's a beautiful film. And Chuck is this actually very middle class, educated, soft spoken intellectual, same as Iggy Pop.
Yeah.
Weirdly enough, but you think of it as these like brazen rock and roll, Neanderthals or something, but they're not. They're actually really educated and softly spoken. in the rehearsals for the show with Keith Richards and Chuck Berry, it's in the film, it's brilliant. Keith isn't playing the riff right to one of his great hooks, and Chuck makes him do it about 12 times and stops him and goes, no, it's like this. 12 times he stops, and you can tell Keith, no one's spoken to Keith like that for 20 years.
Exactly.
And he's embarrassed, and he's trying to get this riff right, and he can't get it to Chuck's, criteria. Eventually he does, but it shows you just the minutiae of difference between playing a riff cod and playing a riff right, and it's infinitesimal small details of inflection and groove and push and pull that makes that riff rock. And it's not something you can write down on paper or intellectualize about. It's something you have to sense and feel. Yeah. And it was fantastic seeing that, because Keith Richards, of course, one of the most famous rock and roll stars in history, his main backbone of inspiration and tutorage has been Chuck Berry, and that even he couldn't get the riff right. After 30 years of success of the Stones, he's still playing the riff wrong. I just thought, well, that just shows you how far you got to go. And the riffs aren't that complicated, but just the way you play it. And that sensibility, it's a sensibility that can take a long time to really learn. Some cats get it really quick, like Hendrix or, the greats, and like Kurt Cobain, but often they die early. But, 21, 22, they have that understanding of an old blues man in his 80s or a jazz guy or something. That muscle reflex sensibility of where the pocket lies, but that's accessible to everybody. I don't think that's just exclusive to a few talented cats. You can learn that same way Keith learned it. It might be a humiliating, difficult experience, but you can do it if you're really determined, you're really passionate, and you keep doing it. My son just learned how to play bossa nova guitar off YouTube videos. Wow. It's really good. Yeah. I mean, there's nothing to stop you now from doing any of that, but it does require a lot of discipline and commitment. And I think for me, it rubs off on you. If you listen to great songs, little bits rub off and they come through your songs. You work with great artists as a producer or co-writer, little bits rub off. Whenever I work with McCartney, when I go back to my hotel, I'd write a song. Yeah. It might be midnight and I've done a long day with him, but I was like, while I'm down in this studio setup in East Sussex and I'm close to that source, I'm going to write a song every day. Yeah. I'm going to pull it down from heaven and put it in. Oh. And some of those songs are great. So I think it's being able to go the extra mile sometimes for the inspiration and the muse. Whereas a lot of people just go, oh, you know what, I just want to watch TV, I've had a long day. That's not what the greats, you all keep going obsessively. I think most of the greats are all a little bit on the spectrum, because the amount of obsessive focus they have to required to do that requires you to be a little bit on the spectrum. If you weren't on it, you will be on it. It's like that cliche, if you want to be a great writer, you're going to have an unhappy childhood, and if you didn't have an unhappy childhood, you got to invent one. Yeah. But all those things, that's kind of like the NLP thing. As another technique I use with singers sometimes, which I've learned from reading a book on Ray Charles and John Hammond, who was his producer, was an incredible producer. Also produced Dylan's early albums, and he was producing a Ray Charles album, and he got a call that Ray's mother had died. So he walked out to the studio with the phone. He said, "Oh, Ray, I got a really tough call. Your mother's dead." Ray took the call, hung up, and John goes, "Oh, we can postpone the session, go home." And he goes, No, roll the tape. And so then he made one of his early classic albums in like 2 hours. He just recorded the whole thing in one day as a kind of homage to his mother who just died. So sometimes when I'm in the studio and the singer's going a bit blasé and a bit like he's sung it 17 times and he's just doing it a bit sort of, you know, tad, and he's just got a bit snowblind from it. I'll go, look, you know, often when I'm working with singers, we'll do one take, and then I'll say, okay, let's do another take. Maybe this time, you know, do an angry one. It doesn't matter what the song is, it's just a different expression of it. Then I might say the next take, let's do a real broken, heartfelt, introverted one. You know, really quiet. I don't know, you know, so I'll throw different instructions and directions. And so if they're really sure, you've got to be fairly confident. I'll say, look, imagine you just had a call and your mother's died, and you're going to sing this take to her as a tribute. Do it like that. And they go, what the fuck? What are you trying to do with my head, you? I was trying to get a performance out of you.
Yeah.
But, you know, I remember doing that with Danny from Embrace, and we got a killer vocal out of it. And sometimes those things where you're playing with your imagination, playing with pictures, visuals, can really help.
I think particularly with vocals, that sort of thing of being, you know, getting into character, if you want, you know, for want of another term, you know, getting into the song. It is really a psychological trick to do that. How do you get into that space to sing?
I don't know. People have to work that out for themselves.
No.
I know. And then again, paradoxically, sometimes if you get too into character, it starts sounding fake.
Well, could do.
So you're going to come back to a naive. Yeah, it's just it's a weird one. It's always the trickiest, hardest part of the vocals sometimes, because it's the one thing you can't actually go in and turn a knob on. You know, like if someone's doing a guitar, you can turn the fuzz up or turn the treble down, or you know. I can sing ideas to singers, which obviously helps, especially when we're working out harmonies and stuff. But I don't have the best voice. But it's a hard one. I mean, musically generally is tricky in that way because it's invisible. You can't see it.
No,
you can feel it.
Well, that actually is one of the problems with vocals. You can't actually see the instrument, can you? You know.
And it's
so it is all about imagination.
Yeah, and you can't tune the machine head to get there.
No.
Mind you, thank God we've got technology now, and we've got plugins that help us do all that. But you know, it's essentially a great vocal is a performance and an emotional expression. Now, like a great singer, as the classic phrase goes, will sing you the telephone directory and make you cry. You know, again, the lyrics don't have to be meaningful for the singer to sing, make you feel emotional. You know, the human voice is the most effective instrument for emotional transmission. You know, and I think the next instrument that comes closest to it is possibly the cello. And then way down the list, the guitars and basses are quite good actually, but that's quite like a cello. But certainly the voice can go way beyond that. And but how you arrange that, and that's it's all psychology, I think. And how you get a good performance. I often get the singer to do, I don't know, 7, 8 takes with different characters, and then I compile it. I take all the best bits of that, compile it. The furthest I've gone was actually with Embrace, and Danny had a particular insecurity with his voice, which when he was on form was beautiful, but when he wasn't, it was difficult. And he'd often get these psychosomatic anxious frogs leap up in his vocal. We tried loads of NLP, loads of psychology on him, and I would often I think we did about 250 vocal takes on one song with him once, in batches of 25. So we did 25 vocals. I'd do a comp, and we put it aside. Then we do it all over again, and do another 25 vocals. This would take about 4 to 6 hours each session.
Wow.
And we do that like 4 or 5 times, and I'd have 5 comps from about 250 vocal takes.
Yeah.
And then I'd comp those.
God.
And then I might get him to drop in on a couple of lines, and then that would be the vocal. But I've said unbelievable arduous ascent up the side of the cliff. You know, you have to use the most patience I've ever known. And, you know, you don't have an infinite budget, and those studios are expensive, and spending it indulgent. But at the end of the day, the vocal's the most important thing. It's the thing people generally connect with primarily above all else. So it's worth spending the focus on it, but I'm never going to do that again.
No. That sounds pretty astonishing.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, sometimes you can get fantastic vocal out of 3 takes, even out of 1 take. It's very rare I use 1 take though. And they're gruff, and I don't even tune it that way, but there's an expression, there's a vibe in the performance that makes it work. It's also, you know, it's a bit like, what are we doing when we're making a record? Are we making, you know, the best record ever made, the best vocal ever recorded, the best performance? So what's the criteria for what we're trying to do? What is the function of it? Why are we doing it? What's it? Is it promote a tour, promote an album, or is it just because we love the record? All those things come into the context of it, and music is always contextual.
yeah.
So the context always defines whether it's going to work or not, and it's always going to determine, you know, that. And you know, I'll often, you know, in that sense, it's like sometimes it's the context is such that if it's more artistic, it doesn't have to be that perfect on the pitch. It can be more Dylan, you know.
Yeah.
It's more artistic, but you still have to have the emotional weight and authenticity to it. It has to be kind of believable.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, I still love a lot of 70s pop, like even things like Smokey and Kenny were awful at the time. I listen to those records now, I go, wow, those vocals sound good. That acoustic sounds amazing. And I'm like, wow. And I think even though sometimes the songwriting is really banal, the way the producers made it, the combination of voices and the feeling results in me feeling really good about it. And I mean, that's bizarre as well, because you'd expect it to have a meaningful poetic line for you to feel like that.
Yeah.
But no, it can be ABBA as well. It can, I mean, it can be association. It's all association, but you know, it's so with singers, it's really what you know. I tend to like with singers. I tend to not listen. I'm one of those people that doesn't really listen to the lyric or the vocal that much straight away. I listen to the record and the vibe, and I'll slowly get into the lyric and the melody and the meaning of what I think the writer's trying to say. Once I've connected to something in the record, you know, but I know for that that's not possibly true for most people. Most people, that's a phrase I don't like to use, but generally most people say it is the lyric. And I know a lot of kids like a story and they follow the lyric, and it's very important. But for me, it's the sound of it that's more important. But I like the sound of the vocal and the sound of the vocal in with the record or with the guitars or whatever. Then that's my doorway in. Once I'm in, then I'll start investigating the lyric. It may just start with the main hook of the chorus, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I can relate to that. Pull me in, and then I might be more inquisitive to find out what the rest of the verses are. But there's a lot of songs like Bowie and stuff where,
oh my God, yeah.
I remember Life on Mars being a really big record for me when I was a kid, and it's a real story. But again, like Dylan, I don't understand a word of it. I don't understand about sailors fighting in a bar, and you know, what is he going on about? And I wouldn't even try and follow. I just follow the kind of vibe of it.
Yeah. Well,
and then just those words would be like little splashes of colours.
Yeah.
So I kind of sense a lot of people else are like that, you know. then you don't have to buy into the whole story of the lyric to be able to get a lot of emotion out of the song, you know.
Yeah.
But you do need certain turns of phrases and words or whatever that pull you in somehow. But again, a great singer doesn't have to be like a Tina Turner great singer. It could be like Ian Curtis, a non-singer, but they're great. How they phrase those words will make it so you want to listen to it or not. And
I think
it's not just the words, it's how they do it, you know.
Yeah. You're talking about Bowie. I mean, because obviously, again, going back to the sort of cut-up thing, which obviously, you know, he was sort of famous for using that stuff. But I mean, the other sort of characters who were obviously using that sort of thing, like Kurt Cobain. I mean, you look at the lyrics; they don't mean anything, you know, but they've got some great lines in there.
That's right, and with the way he sings them, you're
absolutely.
like, oh my God,
and
yeah.
Same thing, you know. You listen.
I know, it's amazing. You can paint pictures with when you've got a voice like that, and you got the pain behind it. You can really feel the pain. Then it's very powerful, and it can just be a mumble. I mean, Hendrix wasn't the greatest singer, but the vocals are fantastic. He hated his singing. He never wanted to do it.
Yeah, but come on, most musicians hate what they do in hindsight, don't they?
Most singers hate their voices, it's true. Generally, most people hate their own voice when they hear it back in the headphones or in so I hate mine. I've actually made a solo album that's coming out later this year of a singer-songwriter, sort of folky, psychedelic pop songs where I'm singing them all, and they're all songs I've written. And that's taken me a long time to get the confidence and courage to do that, even though I've been making records since I was a teenager for 40 years. I've only just made that record. I've written a lot of songs for other artists that have been hits, but I've never done it myself. So that's a challenge. And it's very nourishing and enriching to do it, even regardless of whether it's successful or not. Sometimes it's important to do things like that just to put yourself in the right position, to be able to get a deeper understanding. It certainly helped my understanding of what an artist. When you're on the other side of the glass, it's a whole other world. When you got the headphones on and the producers, you know, critiquing you, it's a whole different planet from when you're just singing along to a record on the radio in your kitchen or in the shower, and it's terrifying. And there's a lot of technique that comes with that makes that you know, makes it easier for you to do it. But yeah, it's and doing it myself, it made me, you know, acutely aware of just how challenging that is. I don't know if it's made me any more patient as a producer, but it's certainly I have more empathy for the singer. I know I've done it a few times. I do know what it's like on that other side, and I hope I can you know, usually find the empathy to help give the singer more confidence and get the best out of them. So,
well, that's been a great chat, Youth. Really good, really lovely.
Great, yeah, pleasure, Vic. Thanks very much. I hope it works well. Send us a link.
So many things you said, I thought, oh yeah. I mean, there's lots of themes that run through when I talk to different people that are very, very similar, you know, especially the thing about inspiration and how the breaks come as well and stuff like that. But it makes you realize that, like you're saying, some of this stuff you just can't sort of go, yeah, this is how it works. It's like, I've got no idea how this works. You can put yourself in place and things happen, but you know, how do you?
Yeah, paradoxically, you know, many artists have learned to express themselves emotionally through the music or the art, not through being able to describe what it is. They're often terrible in their interviews. They don't know how to. And then when they're in a studio environment, I had an artist in yesterday, and he's going, "Oh, we're doing a guitar overdub with this session guitarist who's great." And he said, oh, I want it to sound, he said, I just want it to sound like a plane going up a runway and taking off. And I said, oh, what does that sound like? He goes, I don't know, like a plane down, whoosh, you know. I was like, I understand. The guitarist looking at me like, what's that? And I'm like, I said, okay, let's get your slide bar and a bottleneck and do a long slide that just goes really low up until the beginning of the solo. It'd be like a whoosh, you know.
Yeah.
And I looked at the artist, he was like, and I just do it. And we did it. And then the artist was like, yeah, that's exactly what I meant. Now he couldn't have described that to the guitarist. He just said, you know, plane taking off. So, you know, it's like, it is the ineffable often what you're talking about with creativity and art and writing. It's almost impossible to, it's the opposite side of your brain from the intellectual, rational, listing, Apollonian side. It's the creative side is the poetic, ambiguous, you know, goddess lake of vagueness, really.
Yes, dreams.
And
lake of dreams.
Somehow you have to try and use, you know, build a bridge between the two to be able to realize the idea or the emotion that's trying to be expressed. Or if you're trying to direct a musician, you have, it's you know, it's a different language. And it is a language. It is a vocabulary and language. But a lot of artists, they just don't have that gift of being able to put it into words. And luckily, that's good, because that's why they come to me or producers and they help realize it for them, you know, with them. Yeah.
It's brilliant. Well, thanks ever so much. That's been a brilliant chat.
Pleasure. Well, good luck with it. Yeah, and I look forward to seeing it.
Yeah, and perhaps we can put some stuff in the show notes, you know, about your stuff that you're doing at the moment, your album, and you know, all the stuff that you've done in the past, so that people can obviously joke.
Great. Well, let me know where you're gonna send me a link, and I'll share it on networks and stuff. Yeah, great.
Yeah, that'd be good.
All right, Vinny. Thanks for asking. All the best. Cheers.
Big thanks to Youth. Obviously, the details of how you can find out more about the bands that he's been in and the material will all be on the show notes. There's also some stuff on there about the charity that I run and Blues Camp, which is happening. Yeah, and all some other exciting stuff. Okay, so until next time, I'll see you then.